Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. I'm Jessica Flynn and I am the owner and maker of Flynn Sisters Boutique. And today we're gonna be doing a fun peekaboo tutorial. Now, I've already done a peekaboo design on this channel before, but it's kind of an old, dated tutorial, and I wanted to add in some newer tips and tricks that I've learned since then that I think would be really helpful for you guys. And I know that like hot pink and nude are a really unlikely combo, but when they get together, they just rock together and really get me in the feels. I absolutely love how this looks, and I hope you guys enjoy it too. So you know I'm gonna have all the products listed and linked down below in the description box. You might even find some discount codes for you there as well. And be sure to check out the links to all of our social media, you guys. We're on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. We have a lot of fun over at TikTok. So that's definitely enough chit chat from me. Let's go ahead and get started. All right, you guys, so as usual, I'm starting with a fully prepped and sanded tumbler that I've spray painted this beautiful hot pink. This is Montana Cans Infra Pink color. And then as soon as that was dry, I'm ready to apply my epoxy, which we're going to use as the adhesive for our glitter. We want a very, very, very thin layer of epoxy here. So if you're finding that it's hard to spread your epoxy really thin, you can try and get your cup warm to the touch with your heat gun or maybe a small space heater, and that's going to help your epoxy spread like butter and ensure that we have a really, really thin coat, because again, we're only going to need enough to adhere our glitter. All right, and then once our epoxy is on there, I'm going to put my glitter on. We're using Wednesdays from Peachy Olive Glitters. It's my favorite hot pink glitter of all time. So pretty. And you're just gonna let it rip all over your entire cup. Normally, I wouldn't glitter the bottom of my cup when I'm doing a peekaboo design, just because we're going to be painting over it anyway and the bottom won't show. However, I forgot that day, so I just went for the whole cup. All right, and then once we got our glitter applied, I'm going to set this on my rack to dry for about 2 to 3 hours before we start on our first coat of epoxy. For my first coat here, I have 30 milliliters of Alumilite's Amazing Clear Cast formula, and we're just going to apply this all over the cup like we normally would. Once I've applied my epoxy, I'm going to let this dry for about 4 to 6 hours, and then I'll come right back and just do a second coat right over the top of this. I want to let that second coat dry for at least 8 to 12 hours before we move on to our next step. All right, and so my cup has been drying for at least 12 hours, and now I'm ready to sand. Anytime I'm doing sanding for a peekaboo design, I sand down my top rim twice as much as I normally would. If you watched any of my videos, you guys know that I always sand down enough to expose a fine line of stainless steel up around the top, which is where our final layers of epoxy will adhere to create the seal for our cup. That way we're establishing the seal on the outer rim rather than the very top rim where it's more vulnerable with wear. When we're doing a peekaboo though, we're going to double down on that because we're going to be painting over this, and once we paint over this, we have to sand down again to once again expose a fine line of stainless steel. But if we don't sand down this glitter far enough, when we go to sand for the second time, we'll very easily sand through our paint to expose the glitter layer, which we don't want, okay? And if you've ever made one of these and you've made the same mistake, you know exactly what I'm talking about. So this is just a proactive step to ensure that we finish strong and have a nice clean rim at the end, all right? And I think you're gonna see what I mean when we get to, you know, the back half of this video, all right? So I'm just really sanding away, again, exposing a little bit thicker fine line of stainless steel up there at the top. And then we're also going to sand down the bottom rim. It's important to note that any kind of like bumps and major imperfections that are left in this epoxy layer before paint will show through the paint, and we'll show through that epoxy later on. So we really want to take our time to make sure that this is nice and smooth and no bumpies. We also want to make sure that we buff out any aggressive sand lines with that finer grit sanding block, because you will also see, you know, really deep sand lines through the paint if we don't take care of those as well. So just make sure that we get a nice, smooth, clean finish. Once we're done sanding, I'm just going to rinse this off with some dish soap and water, dry it off with paper towels, and now we're ready to move on with our decals. Next, I'm going to show you guys how I designed the pattern for my Peekaboo. So in Cricut Design Space, I'm going to select the Shapes feature, then click on the square. Then I'm going to unlock the proportions up there at the top by clicking on the little lock button. And I'm going to resize my square to the same height and width around my cup. So my cup was 8 inches tall by 9.5 inches around. So that's the size of my square. Then I changed the color to white so I could see everything going on really clearly. Next, I'm going to add in my lightning bolt and my star. These are the two elements of my pattern. And I'm going to resize my lightning bolt to kind of round about the size that I want. I determined that I wanted it to be 2 inches tall. And I kind of wanted to tilt it just a little bit. I had a very specific vision for this, okay? And then I just kind of positioned it against the very edge of that template. And then I duplicated it 3 times for the first row of my pattern. Once I got all 3 of those arranged on the edge of my template how I wanted, I selected all 3 of them. The way that I selected these was I pressed Control Shift on my keyboard, then clicked on all 3 of them. This selected all 3 at the same time, and then I clicked on Align, Distribute vertically, then Align to the right. And that made sure they're perfectly lined up and then also spaced evenly. After I did that, I selected just 2 of them, again by pressing Control Shift on my keyboard and then clicking on just 2 of them. I'm going to duplicate just those 2, and then I'm going to attach those 2 together. I'm also going to go back and select the first 3, and I will attach those 3. This is going to ensure that I can duplicate the rows evenly to where they all look identical, and it's also going to help me space these out within my template. I'm going to duplicate the row of 3 and place it right after the row of 2. Then I'm going to duplicate the row of 2 and place it right after that second row of 3, and so forth until we have a pattern to fill up our template. You might find that you have to resize things to make them all fit. I had to do this a couple times. You guys didn't see that part, but I did all the guesswork for you. Anyway, once I got enough to fill the pattern and also to where how do I explain this? The row at the end of my pattern is the opposite of the row at the opposite end, so that when this pattern wraps around the cup, it'll be seamless, meaning we won't have 2 identical rows right next to each other. It will just go all the way around the cup in a way that makes sense. Once I have my rows kind of like a guesstimation, I guess, once I have it like a roundabout where I want my rows to be placed, I selected all my rows, and then we went back up to Align, and we went to Distribute horizontally to make sure that they were all distributed evenly. And then I went through and selected only the 2 bolt rows, and I lined those up as well. So it's a lot of lining up to make sure everything is evenly spaced, but it's not too hard once you get the hang of selecting things individually using that Control Shift button on your keyboard and then clicking on stuff as you need it. So hold down the Control and Shift key on your keyboard and then click on things individually to select them at all one time without disturbing anything else on your screen. So that's something that you'll probably have to do a lot while you're arranging this pattern, okay? Obviously, the easier way would be to just buy a pattern already done, or you could just kind of place these individually on your cup in rows. But I didn't think this was too hard, and it was worth the extra time to be able to transfer this all as one piece on my cup. It's probably also helpful to mention that I'm using a straight skinny cup, so there's no taper, so I don't have to account for that in my pattern, which was very helpful. You also want to make sure that that very last 2-bolt row to the, I guess would be the left side, looking at our pattern here, you want to make sure that that's spaced evenly from the edge of your template to where when it wraps around the cup, it's going to be evenly spaced from that 3-bolt row on the other end. And we're going to select all of these at the same time and we're going to weld them together. Then I'm going to duplicate them all. Okay, and I'm going to set aside one. Then I'm going to duplicate this again. This is how I'm going to create the shadow, okay, for our bolt. I'm going to change the color of what will be the shadow of our bolt. And then we're going to select both of those and click slice. I'm going to be left with 3 different versions of what we just did there. I'm only after the pink one, which again will be the shadow of our bolt. I'm going to delete all the little versions that I don't need and just keep that shadow version, and I'm going to keep the original one that I set off to the side earlier. So here we have our Peekaboo stencil. We also have the shadow that we'll add in later. And then for the star, I just wanted to have these as a little detail that we're going to do in white. And I determined that I needed 17 of these. And I think I sized it at 0.4 inches and duplicated that, like I said, 17 times. Now I'm going to move on to editing my bolt shadow. I don't want to have all of these evenly spaced like this when I go to cut them because I'm actually going to hand lay the bolt shadows. So in order to not waste some vinyl, I'm going to try and space these closer together when we go to cut them. Remember that this is a welded shape, so we can't just ungroup it and move it around. So I'm going to go to the shapes feature. I'm going to grab a square. I'm going to place it over one of the bolt shadows, select both the square and the bolt shadows, and click slice so that I'm just left with one of the bolt shadows. I'm going to delete everything I don't need, and then I'm going to duplicate those this bolt shadow here 15 times so that I have enough to cover all of my Peekaboo lightning bolts. I know this is a lot, you guys, and I know that some of you are probably rolling your eyes by now, but I could not find a pre-made SVG with this pattern, which is why I'm showing you how I created it myself. So I'm sorry if this is long and redundant. But anyway, so here we are. I've got all of my bolt shadows created. I've got all the stars I needed, and I have my Peekaboo stenciling done and all ready to go. So we're going to cut this out of vinyl, get it weeded, and then I'm going to show you how I place this on the cup. All right, so here are my lightning bolts. I've cut these out of regular Oracal 651 vinyl, and we're going to transfer them all at once onto our tumbler. And I'm just using my favorite transfer tape here. You want to go ahead and put it face down and lift back that paper backing first before we go to transfer it to make sure that it goes on drama free. Do a little test run with that 1-inch overhang of transfer tape to make sure everything lines up nicely. And then we'll just very carefully wrap this around the cup. Remember that we're just using these as stencils so they don't have to you know, be applied absolutely perfect. We just want to make sure that they line up as straight as possible. I'm going to save that transfer tape for later. And once we've got the stencil on there, we're ready for our paint. I'm going to do 3 coats, 3 nice light coats of this paint here, which I will have listed down below. This is Rustic Pink from Rustoleum. And then as soon as my paint is dry to the touch, I'm ready to remove my decals. I just slowly peel up one corner of the bolt there with my dental pick tool, and then I pull off the remainder of my decal with these little pliers here. Everyone has their favorite way of pulling decals from Peekaboos. This is just personally how I like to do it. All right, and then once I was done pulling the stenciling for our Peekaboo design, I hand placed the bolt shadows with this beautiful pink holographic vinyl. This is from the Arteza holographic vinyl set, which I'll have linked down below in the description box. And you absolutely can place your decals right over the paint as long as your paint is smooth, which it absolutely should be. And the only time I would do this, going straight over the paint like this, is if I was hand placing the decals. I wouldn't risk doing this if it was something I had to transfer with transfer tape. So just keep that in mind. And I just pull them right off of the paper backing here, and using my craft knife, try to line them up as best as I can and then gently press them down. I know this seems super tedious, but between pulling the decals from the paint and stenciling and then hand placing these decals, it only took about 15 minutes, so it wasn't too bad. Once I got all the bolt shadows placed, I went around with my little white stars. I think these are so cute. If you guys missed it earlier in the video, I sized these stars at 0.4 inches, okay? So just under half an inch. And I just kind of placed them randomly between all the bolts. Didn't matter like which way they were facing or what, but I just love this added detail. All right, and once we're done with all that vinyl work, I'm going to go ahead and seal everything in really nicely using Counterculture DIY Quick Coat. This is not epoxy. This is a water-based urethane sealer. You just brush it right onto your cup while it's on the turner using a silicone brush. You can find this at counterculturediy.com, and it's called Quick Coat. I'm applying it to the whole cup, not just to seal in our decal, but to also seal any kind of contaminants or anything that will prevent me from getting a nice solid final coat with my epoxy. This stuff is going to take about 30 to 45 minutes to dry, and then we'll epoxy right over this. All right, and then as soon as that quick coat is dry, I'm going to apply just some regular epoxy here. This coat will be 20 milliliters of epoxy, and we want to let this dry for about 8 to 12 hours before we move on to the next step. All right, so my cup has been drying for about 12 hours, and we are going to sand that top rim again to expose a fine line of stainless steel, which our final layer of epoxy will adhere to create the seal for our cup. Again, creating the seal on the outer rim where it's less vulnerable than it would be if we created the seal at the very top rim. All right, so I've got a 220 grit sanding block here, and I'm just going to very gently sand around the top rim of my cup. Again, do not sand down too much because we don't want to sand through our paint. So remember what we talked about in the first round of sanding earlier in the video. This is where all that hard work is going to pay off, because look at that beautiful finish. We don't have any hot pink glitter coming through where it's not supposed to be. All right, and as soon as we're done sanding, we're just going to rinse this cup off, dry it with some paper towels, and now we're ready for our final coat of epoxy. All right, and so here I am applying the final coat. This is 20 milliliters of epoxy, and I'm just going to spread it on nice and smooth, make sure I'm not missing any spots. And I'm gonna let this roll for about 4 to 6 hours. Then I'll turn my turner off, and I wanna let my cup sit for a full 24 hours before I mess with it. But that's it. So that's it for this tutorial. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you end up doing this design, please be sure to tag me in it. I would love to see what you guys come up with. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you again soon. And a big thank you to all of our Flynn Sisters exclusive members. Thank you for your pledge. Your support means the world to our channel. If you love this video, you could check out our last video here. Also be sure to find us on Instagram, Facebook, Pinterest, and of course subscribe for all our new videos that come out every Wednesday and Saturday. Thanks so much for watching. See you soon.